When I was a kid, I hung out a lot by default with girls. This one girl named Katie. I honestly didn't like Katie at all. She was dumber than a bag of hammers and annoyed me most of the time. But she and I were both outcasts, so we kind of had no choice but to befriend each other. Katie was always doing things that were marvels of stupidity. I'm honestly amazed she made it to adulthood, given how little regard she had for her own safety or other people's. She also lied all the time. The poor child was a real piece of work. When we were about 10, we went out trick-or-treating together. We went by ourselves, as my neighbourhood was generally pretty safe, and I, at least, was smart enough not to do anything spectacularly dangerous, so our parents were fine with us going out, just the two of us, as long as we were back by 10. Everything was fine until we got to one particular house at the end of the long street. It didn't look stand out in any way, but there were no Halloween decorations of any kind. Just a porch light on. We, of course, decided to try for candy. There was no other kids around at the time, just us. And a man in his 50s answered the door, and we said, "Trick or treat." He looked around for a moment, realised we had no parents with us, and said, "Why don't the two of you come inside and show me a few tricks, and we'll see about those treats." Katie, the dipshit that she was, immediately said, "Okay," and stepped through his doorway. I grabbed her and hauled her back out onto the porch and said, "No way, you creep," and dragged her away from the house. She protested the whole time, saying she thought he had good candy, and even claiming that she knew the guy, that he was a personal friend of her family, so she knew he wouldn't hurt us. Keep in mind, this was my neighbourhood, not hers, so it wasn't likely as if she or her family had any reason to know this guy. I said, "If you know him, then what's his name?" She couldn't come up with anything. I just rolled my eyes and kept dragging her back towards my house. The following year she wanted to go trick-or-treating with me again, but I told her she was on her own. I wasn't going to be responsible for saving her from rape or murder. If she was too dense to avoid obvious peril, then that was on her, not me. This took place a while ago. I was 13 and my family had just moved to a new town. A new friend of mine from school and I had made plans to go trick-or-treating together. All the time I remember thinking I was a bit too old for the whole trick-or-treating scene, but who doesn't want free candy? My friend and I figured we still had 1 year of trick-or-treating left in us. Because we were 13 and lived in a fairly safe neighbourhood, my parents thought it was fine for us to trick-or-treat together without adult supervision. Everything was going great. We were having fun, getting candy. What more could you want? Then we rang on the guy's doorbell. The porch light was on, and there was a pumpkin or two, so we figured the people in the house were likely to be handing out candy. A middle-aged man opened the door. At first I was glad, because he was dressed in a costume and happy to see my friend and I, so I felt as if we were here for some top-tier candy. I don't even remember what candy he had, but I do remember what happened next. He asked us to enter into his home, which is weird, but we were 13, so we didn't really think anything of it. Then he asked if he could take our photo. He said he always liked to take photos of the kids every year at Halloween, because he loved seeing the costumes and all the effort they made. On one of his walls were a bunch of pictures of different random unrelated children in Halloween costumes. At this point, even being a dumb 13-year-old, I was starting to get kind of creeped out, but I figured it was best not to upset the man, and let him take the picture and then we could leave. So he snaps a photo of us, and then pulls out a clipboard with a sheet of paper on it, with a bunch of names written in childish handwriting. He says he likes the kids whose picture he takes to sign their names so he can know who they are. At this point we were mega creeped out. We should have just turned and ran, but we were too conditioned not to be rude. I decided to sign a fake name. He looked at the paper, then looked back at me, and down at the paper again. Then he repeated the name. John Smith was the name I'd given, and he nodded. Luckily after that he didn't do anything, and we were free to leave. But it definitely creeped us both out. At the time, he was just an eccentric guy. But as an adult looking back on the story, It seems much more sinister. I'm so glad nothing bad happened to us, and I hope nothing bad happened to any other kids. It was the Halloween of 2017. We live in a pretty rural area, so Halloween wasn't exactly like everyone else's experience. We barely went trick-or-treating just because of the fact that there wasn't anyone around for miles. To make matters worse, I think we'd only ever received one trick-or-treater knocking on our door, so we never really needed to buy any of the candy or any of the shit like that. My siblings and I would usually go trick-or-treating with my father right up to the age of 11 or 12. However, this year I just turned 13. My father had decided I was responsible enough to venture the night by myself. I of course got a friend over, as who the fuck goes out by themselves on Halloween? It just turned 7 o'clock. We'd got into our pirate costumes and we were ready to brave the mighty Halloween by ourselves. My father had dropped me and my mate Jeremy off in a little cul-de-sac around 2 miles away from the house. Our instructions were to stay within the cul-de-sac, don't go into anyone's house, and to meet him in this spot at exactly 9 o'clock. My father's pretty big on trust, so I brown-nosed him a bit, ensuring him we'd be back here by 9. Once he'd left, we began the usual knocking on strangers' doors and announcing trick-or-treats. We of course, like any other 13-year-old, just wanted the candy. No one wants the tricks. We carried on through and managed to get around the whole cul-de-sac. I glanced down at my watch. It read 8:30. We had half an hour to kill. We began making our way to the houses on the outer ring of the cul-de-sac. As we did, from behind us, we heard a car rolling up. We both turned and looked at each other as the red van pulled in next to us. On the side of the van, it read out, "Free candy." Of course we were that stupid not to think anything of it. The driver rolled down his window. At first we were a bit taken back of how scruffy the man looked. Wiry hair, few teeth, and an awful stench. "Hey boys, your costumes look great. You trick-or-treating?" To which we replied yes. "Great. How come you're not with your parents?" I looked at Jeremy and shrugged. "We're 13. We don't need our parents to come with us. Anyway, my dad's picking us up soon." I look back at that comment now, thinking how stupid I was. However, we were in a cul-de-sac. Nothing could go wrong here. How wrong I was. The man responded with, "Your dad's going to be running late, and he's asked me to pick the two of you up." I glanced back at Jeremy again. I could tell he was nervous. The man made a comment saying something along the lines of, "And plus I've got free candy." Screw it, I thought. If he said that Dad had told him to come get us, then I suppose we should go with him. The man got out the driver's side door and opened the back, intending for us to climb in. I glanced in and saw a few buckets full of candy. Jeremy climbed into the van and made his way over to one of the buckets. The smell at that point was awful, kind of like rotting animal smell. I was about to follow Jeremy into the van when I heard a commotion behind us. A woman came rushing out of her front door screaming and yelling, intending to make a scene. The man looked back at me and shoved me to the ground. He slammed the door and bolted down the road and out the cul-de-sac, with Jeremy still in the van. The woman came to my aid. She began fussing all over me. I couldn't understand why at that point. I'd hit my head pretty hard when I fell. "Are you alright?" she said, whimpering. "I've called the police." The next few days were hell, and I was an absolute wreck. Jeremy was gone. He hadn't been seen for days. The police had interviewed me, and even put out broadcasts all over the news. The papers were plastered with recent pictures of Jeremy. There's been no sighting of him since. To this day I blame myself for what happened. I've been in a dark place since then, growing up with the fact that I was the one who'd done this. He was my friend at my house. I'm so sorry.